Dear friends, today we welcome Peter Macia Evans, who has been appointed to serve as our pastor. We believe.
Oh, dear God, you have heard our prayers, and we are grateful for your grace, your abiding presence, and the ways you continue to walk with us in the midst of confusion, frustration, and even pain. We're grateful that you show up for us as everlasting arms onto which we can lean, especially when those times are tough. Remember those on our prayer list within our community. Remember those who are sick, those who are suffering in obvious or silent ways, and those who are in the midst of mourning and grieving, dealing with the loss of loved ones. Oh God, not only do we know that you hear our prayers, but we know that you care, and the assurance of your presence in our lives brings us comfort. We pray that you will continue to strengthen us and all those who may be in need today. We also pray that this community may be empowered to work for a world where justice reigns for all folk, where all needs are met, and where everyone is safe to live out the fullness of who they are created to be. To you, God, we are ever so grateful.
Our scripture reading today comes from the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible, John 13, verses 21 through 34. Jesus foretells his betrayal. After saying this, Jesus was troubled in spirit and declared, "Very truly, I tell you, one of you will betray me." The disciples looked at one another, uncertain of whom he was speaking. One of his disciples, the one whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. Simon Peter therefore motioned to him to ask Jesus of whom he was speaking. So while reclining next to Jesus, he asked him, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus answered, "It is the one to whom I give this piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish." So when he had dipped the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas, son of Simon Iscariot. After he received the piece of bread, Satan entered into him. Jesus said to him, "Do quickly what you are going to do." Now no one at the table knew why he said this to him. Some thought that because Judas had the common purse, Jesus was telling him, "Buy what we need for the festival," or that he should give something to the poor. So after receiving the piece of bread, he immediately went out, and it was night. The new commandment. When he had gone out, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot go, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another."
As I've said before, it truly is a joy to stand before you and an honor to be here serving the First United Methodist Church of Roseville. It's both an honor but also humbling, knowing of the pastors who have gone before me and knowing just the taste that I have gotten already, the beautiful character of the community that I will be serving. Because as much as I am excited about being here, there is also some grief involved in these transitions. This mid-year appointment underlies the reality of me unexpectedly having to leave the community I love at St. Mark's, but also reveals itself in this community dealing with the loss of Pastor Raleigh, the person that you love. These things are never easy, but it will remain a reoccurring theme. For we are always in the process of holding tensions, like the celebration of the new and the remembrance of what has passed. Such is life, in a way, and such is the situation that we find ourselves in here at First UMC Roseville this morning. So today we'll be exploring a story that centers around a time of transition, a moment at an ancient table that stood at the intersection of looking back at what was and looking forward to what was to come. It is my hope that we will be able to appreciate and describe the legacy of last words and how it informs us, not only in the performance of rituals of belonging, but in the ways that it instructs us to act as a community committed to live into the Jesus traditions of love. Let us pray. Dear God, in this moment, we open up our hearts to you. We are willing to receive that which you have for us. In some way, may we be better equipped to be your love, your grace for this world. Amen. So our text comes from the book of John. And not to get into it that much, but John is an interesting gospel. It's very different than the other synoptic gospel, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And as early as the 2nd century, the church fathers were describing it as a spiritual gospel. So it wasn't necessarily as concerned about laying out the facts of Jesus' life as the accepted narrative. It was more worried about these theological questions. So our text comes from a portion of John, though, that leads up to Jesus' arrest and crucifixion. It forms a genesis of what scholars call the farewell discourses. These are theology-infused words of Jesus that take up several chapters in which Jesus directs his teachings to his disciples in preparation of what was to come. Kind of inspire them to keep on keeping on despite the events that got kicked off that night. So Jesus begins his instruction by giving what is described as a new commandment, to love one another, signaling that this love will be that which marked them as true disciples. There is a sense of urgency to his words because this was not just another teaching over a meal. Jesus was thinking about legacy, that which will live on. And because of this, his last words were imbued with more meaning. The legacy of last words. This idea of the legacy of last words, and shout out to my wife Kwame for giving me that title, led me to think of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. King is known for many things and rightly acknowledged as a modern-day prophet. As a pastor and theologian, he has written a voluminous amount of work extending back to his time in seminary, and he's obviously known for his many speeches that stand as kind of clarion calls for the nation. Because of this, it is unfortunate that the complexity of who he was often gets boiled down to black and white images of King on the Washington Wall in the summer of '63, holding captive an audience by his obvious oratorical artistry and prophetic poignancy. I have a dream, he said. You can go back to that other picture. I'll let you know. Second to this image is the one we have of him speaking to the crowd in Mason's temple the night before he was killed. He spoke about going to the mountaintop, assuring his followers that we, as a people, are going to get to the promised land, the place where the beloved community is fully realized. Having a sense of his mortality and thinking about legacy, that which will live on, imbued his words with more meaning, leading us to consider the legacy of his last words. But context matters. So this picture that you see right now was taken during a fraught protest march in Memphis near the end of March in 1968 in support of sanitation workers. It was a march that devolved into violence. And you can actually even see the strain on his face, the concern, the angst. At that time, King was beset with a bevy of death threats, and Memphis was particularly dangerous. Remember, during this time, King was not as beloved as he is now. In fact, he was actually hated in many parts of America. Still, in the next picture. Resolute in showing the strength of nonviolent social action, King decided to go back to Memphis in early April, even against the advice of some of his close advisors. The pervading environment of death threats, hate, betrayal for some of the civil rights groups that abandoned him, and other things, created a stormy context that mirrored the actual storm that fiercely filled the night sky of April 3rd, 1968, as he approached the podium at Mason's Temple. And into a bank of microphones in front of an overflowing crowd, King said, "I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to where? Promised land." And of course, we know that the very next day, on April 4th, King was killed by an assassin's bullet while standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Hotel. Next picture. Prompting mass rioting in many cities, including in D.C., where my mother, newly pregnant with her second child, had to navigate the raging streets in order to get to my parents' apartment in Southwest D.C. to pick up her then 10-month-old baby from the Civic. You see, these stories run deep, and context matters. Next one. Like King, who was determined to head back to the violent cauldron of Memphis, even though it was for him a deadly decision, so was Jesus determined to go back to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover, though it was for him a deadly decision. And I'm sure it was made despite the best advice of some of his advisors. There were active plots to take Jesus' life. Plots that were both religious but mostly political in nature. In fact, he was hiding out in a little village in Ephraim because of these dangers. The people openly wondered if Jesus would show up in Jerusalem, seeing that the word was out that he was to be arrested on sight. This intensifies the drama and the audacity of Jesus' entrance that we commemorate on Palm Sunday. Still, it sets the stage to what is happening in our text, as Jesus gathers with his disciples in that ancient Jerusalem room for the last time in what is known as the Last Supper. And the account in the 13th chapter actually begins by saying that Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and to go to the Father. This is the context of Jesus' last words and his new commandment to love. In fact, we read that this whole exchange between Jesus and Judah happened right before that. Jesus called him out and said, "I know what you're going to do, so be about your business." And if you can just imagine the tension that was there, that tension that I believe that Jesus really didn't want to die. As evidenced just a few moments later in Gethsemane when he's crying tears of blood. Jesus did not want to die. You can even imagine Jesus thinking the same thoughts that thousands of years later King had in his head when he put into words on that Memphis night, "Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will." Jesus' testament of last words, spoken immediately after the exodus of Judas, precipitating a sequence of events that would lead to his death, is weighted with more meaning. So, hear anew the urgency in Jesus' words to his now 11 disciples as he considers his legacy. "I am with you just a little bit longer. Where I'm going, you cannot come. But I give you this new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, so also you love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Now, I promised that I would not be too long today, so I'll get right to the point and ask him, what does this mean for us today? Why on this, the advent of my time here at First UMC Roseville, am I making my first words a meditation on the legacy of Jesus' and King's last words? Next picture. It is because I believe it beautifully sets forth what I hope we can embody together as we embark on this next chapter of this church's long, rich history. We consider the weighted last words of Jesus and prophets like King, not for reasons of nostalgia or the participation of rote performances of religious ceremony, no. We consider their last words so that we can put them first, thus taking seriously the new command in King's vision, positioning ourselves to be faithful stewards of the spiritual legacies that we have inherited as a gift. We consider those last words first because it connects us to the life of Jesus, a life we are called to remember, a life that inspires us to participate in the same barrier-breaking, liberating, and hope-instilled ministry that he embodied. We consider those last words first because love demands it. And as King said, love is that which is creative and redemptive. Love builds up and unites, leading to the creation of the beloved community. Putting those last words first means doing the necessary work to forgive and living into the liberating truth that God accepts us. And that grace allows us to not only be free, but be agents of that grace, working for what is just and seeking to make right that which is wrong, whether here in Roseville or Sacramento, Washington, D.C., down at the southern border, or in northern Syria. Putting those last words first means not being afraid to take risks, to continue our advocacy for those marginalized in society, including our LGBT community, and furthering our participation with Pride and with other organizations doing the good work of affirming all people as God's children. Putting those last words first means continue to reach out and building on our connectional partnership with churches like St. Mark's and other local churches and organizations as we seek to expand our ministries that help the immigrant and the refugees communities. Putting our last words first means learning to love each other as an imperative, as if our faith and our very lives depend on it. It's understanding that the stakes are high. With all the things that are happening in this world, I have no doubt that one of these days, someone who might be on the verge of giving up might enter through those red doors and decide that life is worth living at least just another day because of love that we practice as a community. This is what it means to adhere to Jesus' command, made in that simple Jerusalem room, to love one another as a mark of true discipleship. And this is what it means to work towards the realization of the beloved community, the promised land that King said that we will all get to on that stormy Memphis night. And it is my hope that we do more than just do church, but that we put those last words forth in order to build a legacy of hope here in Roseville and beyond. In conclusion, on this All Saints Sunday, I want to briefly tell you about my grandfather, Methuselah Pumphrey. That's right, Methuselah. He just died this past January at the age of 97. Born and raised on Maryland soil, my grandfather's steadfast faith was forged in the fires of the racist Jim Crow South. One of the enduring legacies that my grandfather sought to instill in us, beyond the resilience, beyond the incredible work ethic that was evidenced by his roughened hands made callous by a lifetime of tilling and tending to the soil, beyond the love that he had for his beloved wife Mary of almost 75 years. Beyond all that was this passion for God that he discovered in the early 1930s in a little country Methodist church in Calvert County. His prayer for us, his progeny, was that we would know and serve God. During his last days, he could not hear well. But in my final conversation with him, not long before he died, I was able to tell him that I was becoming a Methodist minister. And though his voice was frail, I can hear his smile through his voice. As my great father, Methuselah's last words to me were, "That's good. And good luck there, young fellow." As I stand before you, I am quite literally a manifestation of my grandfather's prayer. And because of that, I can assure you that as your pastor, I will take my responsibilities to you and this community seriously. It is a matter of making his last words first in my life, and a legacy of faith I'm proud to carry. My prayer for you is that this world would know that we are Christians by our love, letting it define our discipleship and the quality of our communal life as we strive to live into the legacy of last words first. Amen.